Hi, I'm licensed IO psychologist Dr. Clif P Lewis, and they say that people in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. But what if you're a millennial in 2021 and you can't afford a house? Roll intro.
We don't want to get sued, so we're going to be like super vague. First mistake.
How are you a manager and unable to deal with conflict?
If nothing else, I'm balanced.
Welcome to Management Tool, the show about psychology, employment, and management, where my esteemed guests and I talk about why what you're doing is wrong. Today, we have our special guest all the way from Edinburgh, UK, Dr. Yumeng Yue. Is the professor now already? Is it still
Nah, it's
doctor?
far away from Professor, right? Well, 30 years from now, probably.
Okay, I'm sure it's not, but we are very happy to have Dr. Yumeng Yue with us today. And I know that I'm butchering your name, but that's the best that I could do. Welcome and thanks for being on the show.
So it's nice to be here, and it's a pleasure to be here, Cliff, and looking forward.
He is currently a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh Business School. His research mainly focuses on frontline service interactions and how these impact employee well-being, service quality, and potentially other stakeholders. More specifically, he investigates how, incidental interactions between employees and customers are framed and scripted, and how those interactions would influence the whole service system. In addition, he is also interested in team dynamics. My guest resumes are so vast that my tongue can't handle it. He is also interested in team dynamics with a specific focus on frontline service teams. His research has been published in journals such as Personnel Psychology. I submitted a paper to them as well. I'm going to ask you about them just now. Journal of Service Research and the European Journal of Work and Organization Psychology.
Well, that's what we do.
What a resume!
This is what we do. We make our resume sound fancy by using fancy words, and which is describing a very simple phenomenon.
Okay, so first things first that I want to know is personnel psychology. How strict are they? What's the rejection rate?
They're quite strict on method. So, as most of applied psychology journals, such as JP, Personnel Psychology.
I'm not even trying JP. They're gonna look at my thing and go, oh, "What?"
Well, like quite strict on data and analytics now, on statistics now. Well, they have been used to being like that, and they are being very renowned of like not very theoretically driven. So as long as you get an interesting data set and your data is kind of strict, your data is kind of okay, and your analyze is okay, and they don't actually care about whether your research question is interesting or not, or theoretically.
The data, like big data sets.
Yeah, it's all about how amazing your data set is.
Okay, no, then I can already start preparing for a different journal submission because I don't have a big data set. Okay, no, that's good. It's good that I manage my expectations. Right. So, Yumeng, as you could probably tell from the title of the podcast, it's all about roasting, and obviously the intro I said as well, roasting people for being bad managers in general. So, just to have a little bit of balance, I like to start the show with a segment called The Sharpest Tool in the Shed, where we talk about someone or something or some place that is doing it right. And today, the sharpest tool in the shed is the South African Department of Home Affairs.
Okay.
Different countries have different versions of this. It's basically our government department that issues like passports and ID documents and birth certificates and marriage certificates and things like that. What do they call them in the UK?
It's probably home office.
Home office?
Home office, and it's probably called home office. And I think it's like home office quite broad. I think there was more branches within home office which take care of what you just said.
Right.
But I think that's a home office matter.
So for us, it's Department of Home Affairs. And the reason that they're the sharpest tool in the shed is because recently they have announced that they are looking into amending our ID numbers so that it acknowledges chosen or identified gender identity. So in South Africa, I know that in the United States they don't have a federal identification system, and I don't think in the UK either. But in South Africa, everyone has a national identification document and a number that is associated with it. And there's a few things that go into the number, like you can tell someone's birth date from the first 6 digits of the number, and gender and stuff like that as well. And so up until now, still, our ID numbers has coding in it for gender, but that only allows for male, female, and it is assigned at birth. So at the moment, the Department of Home Affairs has welcomed conversations around making, I'm not entirely sure what they're actually going to do, but they are considering making changes so that it does acknowledge gender identity that's not necessarily which it was assigned at birth.
Yeah, it was kind of like social category kind of incorporated.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty cool. We're excited to see what happens and how it pans out and how it's going to be implemented, because at the moment ID numbers are assigned at birth, but that's something that might change later on in life as the person gets older and maybe their gender identity is different than it was assigned at birth. So we'll see. But props for them for being progressive and open to discussions. And that's why Department of Home Affairs South Africa is this week's sharpest tool in the shed.
I think that's quite amazing because it's kind of quite progressive movement.
I haven't heard of any other, I mean, I haven't really been scouring the news for this topic, but I haven't seen anything.
I don't think so. For example, like American, like they don't have national IDs, but they do have Medicare. So like people use Medicare as a kind of ID, and for their.
And does that include like coding for?
I don't think that include coding for. So that definitely have information about your gender, about your biological gender, and.
Well, yeah, in the back end probably, but like. You know,
definitely do not think that include your social category if you choose to identify with some other gender. And UK as well. Like remember, UK is quite open on the whole idea of like social gender identity, but it has never been incorporated into any ID systems that we talk about. So so UK and other European countries, I would say, have been quite in the forefront of the social gender identity movement. But I never heard of that conversation going around because I don't think people actually link the two things together. And because when you think about the ID sort of stuff, and they think whatever needs to be incorporated there should be something more biological, should be something more hard.
Yeah, the only equivalent that I've heard of was some countries allowing your passport.
Okay.
You're allowed, because I have mine here, but I think most countries indicate gender on their passports, and I know some countries have said, we'll, if you want to,
you can change it.
Cool.
That's amazing. It's quite progressive. I was very surprised that you have that actually. You are even discussing that.
We are definitely, I don't know this for certain, but I think we're definitely the only African country. Yeah. There's a lot of stuff in the news at the moment, how being transgender, being any letter within the LGBTQIA plus alphabet mafia is un-African, and it is a colonial thing. You know, the white people brought it from Europe. But there's a lot of black creators, because I live on social media. There's a lot of black creators that's actually saying, no, actually, homophobia and transphobia is a cool thing. Yes.
Did you know that African homophobia is a vestige of colonialism? Let's talk about it. The 72 countries worldwide that criminalize homosexuality, 32 of them are in Africa, and more than half of these are British colonies. Africa's leaders often claim that homosexuality is an imported Western evil, like former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe, who called homosexuality un-African and a white disease, but in fact, it's quite the opposite.
So gender fluidity and homosexuality and all of these rainbow things are very much natural and African. There's lots of old accounts of that, different variations of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I'm not sure how real with that, but like when I watch those American TV shows, and they always picture Africa as very LGBT and
It
very
is.
like and
It
it's
is.
very pictured that way. So so there was like John Oliver did a session around that. So he invited I think he invited a female activist basically coming over to a show, and the activist basically said that well every single president in African countries basically have to like very explicitly exhibit the actions of gender, the actions of homophobic, the actions of homogender identity, and I'm not sure whether that's true, but this is what she said, and so she
Every
has to
president has to what?
she has to like constantly debate with political leaders about the legitimacy of homophobia of homosexuality as well
Oh.
as well as different kind of social gender legitimacy of different social gender categories. She has to constantly debate with various presidents.
No,
and
no, that is true. African leaders are notorious for being homophobic.
okay.
But not our president. Our
Okay.
president has openly, very recently, has openly expressed concern for the safety of trans people in South Africa, especially Black trans people, high risk for violence, and he's openly, said that this is not okay, not on his watch. So our president is really amazing, but the other leaders in Africa are quite non-progressive, let's call it that, and what they always, but what is used a lot to defend this homophobic rhetoric is it's un-African. It's actually it's the homophobia that's colonial, because it didn't serve the colonial goal. Anyway, so
that's a refreshing information.
I originally wanted to discuss people analytics with you, and now we're talking about social justice. I love it. It just shows you what a diehard tree hugger I am.
Yeah. So well, analytics is all about justice as well, so we can talk about that.
Well, this is management tool, so we can talk about anything we want to. But so yeah, I wasn't before you sent me your profile, I wasn't that clued up on the actual work that you do. I thought you were more numbersy stuff.
Yes, so I did most of my method around like survey experiments, and we recently started. This is why I kind of think I kind of want to talk about analytics with you, which was like our view of analytics is very different from your view of analytics as a consulting, as a consultant, as a trainer, as a mentor. And so I just want to share how this is how I think, and I want to know how you think about that as well. So it's a two-way process. And
okay, cool. Well, yeah. So I agree that you can use analytics in social justice and creating change. I am very passionate about making people science more accessible for smaller businesses, because what you find in industry predominantly is so do you know what I mean when I say people science?
Yeah, I kind of know. Yeah.
You know what I mean. Okay.
Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah.
Some people are like, what are you talking about? Unless you have like consultant money or a big HR department, so in other words, a large, older organization, you don't really have access to people science. So you kind of just wing it and do whatever you think is best. But I'm really passionate about making people science and data-driven people decisions, making that accessible for smaller businesses, SMEs, startups. And obviously part of that, a big part of that is analytics. And when you say analytics, a lot, when you and I had a conversation about that one course, one of the things that you mentioned was people are quite anxious. Non-data scientists, when you start talking about analytics, they get really anxious. And that's definitely something that I want to address, not just to students at the university, but in industry in general. So my first question to you would be, why still this air of mystery and terror and horror when people hear the words analytics?
Well, I personally think there are multiple aspects. So the biggest one, probably based on my perspective, is the tendency, if you use analytic, it's equivalent towards inhumanization.
Dehumanization.
Yes. So if you kind of represent each individual as numbers, and a lot of HR people think that you are dehumanize their individuality and the idiosyncrasy as well. So no matter how many dimensions you use to capture a specific individual, and people still think that you don't actually capture the whole.
I'm just a number now.
Yeah, so you're just a number now. Remember the matter of fact, like we don't have a lot of dimensions to capture an individual a lot of time. So we normally, like when we describe a person, we normally have like a survey which have like 5 or 6 dimensions of behaviors, like which is mattering for companies. And so our interpretation of those people are very limited. And so for HR people, it's very worrying because they're like, well, what if they have their own problem? For example, like if you can identify some problem in the person's performance, and the performance start to drop, and you're trying to identify the gap, you're trying to identify the cause, and you collect some data about their personality, their attitudes, whatever they have, and that kind of you correlate that with like the performance and identify that as a problem. A lot of people are worrying that, well, what if that person has a really specific problem that causes his performance drop? We'll miss that because that cannot be addressed by analytic or cannot be addressed by numbers. Even you can say that. So that can only be addressed by very traditional HR practices such as like feedback, interview, 360, those kind of things. And so I think that's probably
360 is technically also fall within the realm of analytics, though, don't you think?
Well, I don't think it's the fault of anybody. So the HR people first, I think the reason they got scared is because they don't know analytics is enough. So that's probably why. So like whenever they talk about analytics, they're thinking about some sort of like very simple regressions, and so you just do a regression and bam, and that's over. And so whatever is most
part of the problem is then a lack of information or lack of understanding.
I think it's lack of understanding, lack of interest in touching that.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a training, so well, I'm not sure about South Africa, but in UK, my perception was that most HR people was trained in a very non-analytic and a non-quantitative kind of way. Yeah. So they have been trained in a way that, well, HR is not about managing numbers. Those are financial people, accounting people, marketing people are going to manage those numbers. And so you are not responsible for profit. You're not responsible for those financial indicators that they are responsible for. And you only need to take care of the well-being of employees. So that's what have been trained for. And so they're very scared of numbers. So I can understand that actually.
So in terms of the perception that it dehumanizes, you can tell me because that's definitely a good point. Because when I, as a consultant, want to introduce analytics as a better way to make decisions, to be, to have better diversity, to be more inclusive, to not work your people to the bone, all of that can be data driven. People can be empowered through data. But then, as you say, people think, oh, now you just become a number, it's dehumanizing. So let me put it like this. If I explain it, if I draw on best practice for psychometrics, you know what psychometrics are, right? Measurements of personality. Not everyone knows. So it's measurement of things, measurement of psychological constructs like personality, aptitude, attitudes, values, whatever. Yeah. So if I draw on those best practices, which says that there's various facets of psychometrics that makes it okay to use. And those facets, I'm choosing my words very carefully. I don't want to use too much jargon and bore you to death. So there's the before, the during, and the after. So and all of these will impact on the so-called dehumanization, right? So the before is you need to make sure that you are measuring things that relate to a person's job.
Yeah.
That stuff that they are familiar with. You're not measuring something foreign that they've never heard of before. So everything that you decide you're going to measure, and this is now for psychometrics, but this is applicable to just measurement and analytics at work in general. So when you measure, you must make sure that you choose before you start measuring things that apply to the specific job or their organizational life in general. And those things need to be fair. They need to be reasonable. You can't now decide, oh, I'm going to measure X, but X has never been part of the job. It's always been Y. Okay?
Yeah.
So that's the before. Then the during is you have to make sure that you are measuring your whatever you're measuring appropriately.
Yeah.
You're not using a ruler to measure weight. You're using a scale to measure weight.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the during, that's the data collection. And then another massive part, and I think this is absolutely crucial into making sure that your analytics aren't dehumanizing, is then how you use that. And
it's very true.
And with psychometrics, I always say, yes, psychometrics is good. It's good to know, because I pretty much only use psychometrics in either career counseling or in recruitment and development exercises. So giving people insight into their preferences, their personality, and things like that. I always tell my clients, this is just one tool. Okay, this is not a paint by numbers. Those pictures that has the 4 is yellow and the 5 is green. It's not like that. Psychometrics only gives you some information about yourself. It only gives you insight. It's not a roadmap. Okay, it's not a crystal ball. And so I think we can use those principles in analytics as well to address this idea that, oh, now I'm just a number. No, you're not just a number. You have a number assigned to you, which gives us information about you, about a part of you, but we have to take everything else into consideration as well, depending on what the decision is you're trying to make.
Yeah.
That was a mouthful.
That's a really good point, because the first and the second step you're mentioning, which is the pre and middle, that is kind of the focus right now. So which is around, well, how do we actually build a valid tool which measures things perfectly? And I think that's the focus now. And so consulting companies are selling those things to their clients, and we charge a large amounts of money. So what they're selling is just the tools. And but I think you're definitely right that the third step definitely need to be addressed, and it doesn't actually have a lot of attention. For example, like if you don't understand anything about analytics, and you buy those fancy instruments from the consulting companies, and they just tell you, oh, just distribute the survey to your employees and get the numbers, and you will have a sense of what's going on in the company.
Yeah.
And this is how they normally package it. Because I think that was totally wrong, by the way. So as you said,
it's like giving a kid the keys to the car. It's just go.
Exactly. So it's like, well, if you put 4 over here, that means you're great. If you are 2 over here, that means you're screwed. So that kind of like, well, the point of dehumanization was criticizing an aspect that organizations are making decisions purely based on analytic results. So
and this is where the management tool comes in. When the manager is lazy and they don't really want to interact with their people and use the analytics, but as part of a more robust collection of information to make it. No, I'm just gonna go, oh, this guy has a 4, good. This guy has a 2, bye. No, out you go. So I think that's definitely Go ahead.
I want to say that the appealing aspect of analytics is that just provide a very simple answer. So it's a very black and white answer, and it's very it's not ambiguous at all, and it's just like if it's a 2, then it's this. If it's a 4, then it's this. So it gives you a very simple solution. And so it allows you the communication of, well, it's kind of like related to organization politics as well, like politics and organization, which was like, it allows the HR director to communicate with with their head more efficiently. So which means that HR director have more leeways of hiding information and choose to present information they want to present if they have a good sense of analytic. Well, it's a little bit too much about politics away.
No, but I mean, it's all intertwined. You can't really separate the one from the other. But then analytics is almost like a double-edged sword. So it has the potential to make decisions that are more inclusive and, you know, all the good things, you know, long-term based and robust and taking all the things into account. But if abused, it could also be used to obscure certain things.
Exactly.
Be used
exactly.
to make black and white decisions and not, you know.
Exactly. Just imagine you are a CEO and you have loads of stuff to attend to every day, and you're cognitively very loading. So somebody comes over and presents you with very ambiguous information. Well, to be honest, if you're a CEO, you don't actually care that much about like human resource issues, and so all you want to know is like, well, whether I do it or not. So, and if you present it as numbers and say, well, if HR director come to the CEO and say, this is HR director come to the CEO and say, this is based on analytics, and we are going to do that. You tend to trust him because you tend to trust the number system. You tend to trust that, well, whatever comes from numbers is fine. But if the HR comes over and say, well, we did a bunch of interviews and asked a bunch of people, expert coming over, and this is what we come out, a CEO tend to not trust that. So he tend to trust numbers which are based on seemingly objective processes, seemingly robust processes of coming up with decisions, seemingly evidence-based. So he sees those kind of data as hard evidence, which is right. And if that hard evidence can give him a very like black and white answer, he tend to go with that. But if you come and say, well, I did a bunch of like interviews with some expert, I invite somebody and this is what they say, and the CEO is like, show me more, and wants more.
Show me the numbers. And what I've seen, and it makes my blood boil. I don't think I need to tell you, but I am very much liberal, left-leaning.
I can imagine that. So it's not very difficult to tell, by the way.
Very difficult, right? So obviously, when faced with very conservative views, I get kind of irritated. And what makes my blood boil is there is this trend now of the whole I did my own research kind of vibe, and where bigots, racists, sexists, homophobes use some kind of statistic that they cherry picked somewhere.
Well, like the most recent example is Jordan Peterson. You probably know him.
I hate Dr. Jordan Peterson. I hate you. You are a disgrace to the field of psychology. Go away.
but look, well, if we put his idea aside, a lot of his data is actually problematic. If you
exactly. So my point that I wanted to make was people go, statistics don't lie. Statistics can very much lie if you're using the wrong statistics.
That's very true. And so there was a book written by Cassie O'Neill. I'm not sure whether you heard of that. So which is called Mass Destruction, which is basically talking about how people in power are using analytics to make decisions that they want to make in the first beginning, which is normally hurt the people in lower social economic status, like minorities and females, and which sounds very objective because it's made by the machine, basically. It's made by machines, it's made by big data analytics, but it's very much being abused by people who understand those things.
But this then brings me back to my original point where to try and convince people that I'm not dehumanizing is, you know, how am I coming up with what I'm measuring? how am I measuring it? And then when I've got the results, how do I apply it? And if you take the people, the example that you just used, the policymakers who pretty much just cherry pick the analytics that they want so that they can do what they want to do.
Yeah.
If you take those analytics or those stats that they're using to build their policies, their discriminatory policies, I'm quite sure that on one, if not all three of those phases, the answer would be, no, I didn't do it the way I should have.
Yeah. So that's a concern now, because not everybody are equipped with the expertise to understand those data. So also the problem was that it's the less you understand about data, the more likely you will trust the data. So
what? Say that again.
So the less expertise you have about statistics and data, the more likely you'll blindly trust the data. The more likely when you hear something like, well, it's based on data, the more likely you will trust it.
Yeah, because stats don't lie.
Yeah, because stats don't lie. So, but every single statistician understands that, well, stats can very much lie. And so the problem was that, so as I said, the problem is the company was normally that, and when decision was presented in that way, and not everybody has the tendency to question that. And first, because they don't want to, and second, because they don't have the expertise to understand like what's going on behind the thing. It's just a little bit like when you show people, oh, this is based on research. How do we
address this? Because the way that
Sorry, yeah, you're saying.
Based on what research?
Sorry, you're saying.
By who?
Well, the problem, so an option to be is that to be very transparent in that process. For example, like to be very much transparent in saying that, instead of saying, well, this is based on statistics, instead of saying that, and very much show the nuances behind those things. For example, like you admit all the limitations after that, admit all the limitations behind that, instead of showing as a hard evidence, showing it as, oh, there was one problem over here, which probably doesn't actually capture the very precise implications of what's going on in the organization. And a very perfect example is the tokenism about female, like in the leadership role. For example, like the tokens, well, I'm not sure whether you do that in South Africa. UK was doing that. So for all the listed companies, you have to have a certain percentage of females on the board.
Yeah, South Africa does have, we call it a broad-based Black economic empowerment. So the main driver is Black empowerment because in any sphere you can imagine, Black Africans in South Africa are disadvantaged. So in terms of employment, management opportunities, equity, blah blah blah, decision-making roles. We also have quotas or affirmative action, but it's a bit more robust. It also includes gender, disability, and things like that. Yeah, so we definitely have it in South Africa.
Yeah, so that's the same thing as UK have, like the quota system, which was like you have to have certain number of women on the board. Then what happens afterwards is that they put tokens like they put tokens of females on the board, which is they don't make any decisions. They just get paid, and they just get paid to be quiet, basically. But if you just show people the number, look, we're doing great over here. Like most of our company have 40% of females on the board. We're doing great. And so they can show the number to people, to general public. But the nuances within that is not being shown. This is like, if that's just a broad kind of example. But if you kind of show that as a company, and companies can also show employees, look, those numbers look great. Like our employees, they have good well-being, they have good engagement, they have good performance, they're very satisfied at their jobs. So we're doing great. So don't worry about that. So about like what's behind that, you never know.
Yeah. So the phases that I used when I draw on best practice from psychometrics, that's basically, and I mean you would know this, it's validity, and then the second one is reliability, and then the third one is fairness.
Yeah.
How do we go about teaching just the general public, because I'm so passionate about making people science accessible to small businesses, startups? How do I teach someone reliability, validity, and fairness without boring them to death. Because
Well,
I sometimes find it very difficult. People say, dude, we don't know what you're talking about.
I'm struggling with that as well. So that's why my question for you. So because every time I start to write equations on the blackboard, students start to yawn, start to complain, and start to say, just shut up. And I have been trying to find a way to not resort into any numbers in teaching teaching those concepts, just talking about validity, reliability, those kind of things, without using any terms such as variances, covariances.
Right. Standard deviations, nothing.
Yes.
So, me too. But like, my kind of go-to is first, eliminating the jargon, but then also, like the example that I use, using a ruler to measure height, not weight, using a scale to use. But then I find that sometimes these analogies are too simplistic, and I find it difficult to, okay, cool, we get that we should measure weight with a scale, but how do I apply that to the workplace? I'm not entirely sure what is the scale and what is the weight.
So I don't have a solution, but I have an example that I can share. Okay. So in psychometrics, they have the concept called anchoring effect, which is your answer towards a specific question is influenced by which question you will be presented before. Mm-hmm. So if you're presented a positive question before, you tend to answer the following question in a positive way, and vice versa. So this is why like your questionnaire should be like a little bit balanced with both like positive anchor questions as well as negative anchor questions. So that's the idea. And if you just talk about the idea of anchoring, then people are bored out. Okay. And the way I teach that was there was an episode of Yes Prime Minister. It's a UK kind of sitcom.
Yeah, don't know.
I'm not sure whether you heard of that. It's like 80s, some sort of political sitcom where the person is talking about basically the anchoring effect, basically how you kind of manipulate the poll by presenting different set of questions. But the last question is actually what you care about. For example, if you want to get people to say they want to include national service, which is basically which is mandatory services for the military. Mm-hmm. If you want to convince people to support that, and you present a bunch of questions in before, and basically it's talking about, well, do you think it's a problem for the country? Do you think our kids are not brave enough? Do you think our national security is on danger? Those kind of questions they present before, and then they ask the question, do you support national service? And people tend to say yes. But if you present a different set of questions, and for example, you say, well, do you think the country do you think young people now have too much burden? Do you think they should be relieved from like burden that they shouldn't be too? Do you think like the government is taking too much money from taxpayers? If you ask those kind of questions and then you ask, do you think national service is necessary? People tend to answer no. So that's the idea of anchoring. And so this is how I introduce that. So like resorting to different kind of like televisions and where television shows, dramas and sitcoms where they talk about something similarly, and which can be related to people's daily conversation, but not everything is like.
That's like third tier level of knowledge. I don't even get there. I'm still struggling to make people understand the issues of reliability, validity, and fairness, because it is so frustrating when people just cherry pick. I tried to explain to a family member the other day how if you're using evidence, and numbers or qualitative, you cannot take the evidence and then use that as substantiation for your position. You have to take all of the evidences together. And look at the sources and how they contradict the blah blah blah, and then from there you can formulate. And
And also, like, I think you have a good point, which was like, if you have a full scale, which is measuring a construct, and the scale have like, let's say 15 items, and a lot of people just take like 5 of them and say, well, this is
See,
yeah, see, this is based on these 5 items, I can see this and this and this. And you're trying to tell them, no, so this construct, the reason why this construct have 15 items.
They lost you. You said construct. What's a construct?
Yeah, exactly. So like, and especially when the construct has multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
And there's just like, oh, see, look at that specific dimension. Let's talk about that dimension.
Yeah, confirmation.
And you're like,
bias.
no, it doesn't make any sense to talk about one specific dimension. You need to talk about the whole thing. And I'm like, why? And then you'll be like, well,
because if you're only going to use one data point, then you could literally find an analytic to substantiate any position.
Exactly. So that's
if I'm a Nazi who hates Jews, and I'm not going to use all of the evidence, I'm just going to use one evidence, then I'm sure you would find analytics somewhere that justifies anti-Semitic. So, but again, I'm using an extreme example of anti-Semitism. It's not always as extreme, so I find it difficult to then relate it back to the workplace.
Yeah, exactly. So a very good another very good example is the IQ test.
Oh yes.
Like, people from different countries are stupid, or like people from different race, a specific race, are stupid. You can very much do that. It's no problem. You just choose to distribute the survey towards different group of people. For example, in the white, you can distribute the survey to white rich people who tend to be like well educated, but for black people, you distribute to those poor ones. And
see, that's why we don't use the IQ test anymore.
No, the content was very like biased towards white.
Exactly. Yes, it was constructed by using white middle class or upper class.
Yeah, exactly.
Respondents.
So it reflects their knowledge.
Exactly.
But like normally, the knowledge other people tend to possess doesn't actually reflect in the IQ test.
Yeah.
So this is my point. So it's that just like you can very much cater the instrument towards the conclusion you want to have in whatever way you want. And so it has this kind of thing has been abused in human analytics quite a lot, because some people understand that and some people don't. And those people who understand that are very much abusing that to convince people this is definitely a good decision and they should definitely be on board.
So it's a difficult conversation to have, because on the one side, you want to advocate for analytics. You want to say it can empower, it can make your workplace more inclusive, it can help you scale, it can help you motivate your people, it can help you identify areas where you're not treating your people as well as you should. But in the same breath, you also have to tell people, okay, you can use this, but you have to use it very carefully. Otherwise, you're going to catch these hands.
Yeah, that's a very paradoxical situation. But I think the older solution was to everybody learn analytics. So if everybody understands it, everybody understands the limitation of analytics, and they know the fact that then everybody will be requiring people to present all the information when they're presenting some sort of decisions. So for example, like if everybody understands statistics and analytics, in the future, the HR director cannot just say, well, this is based on the data we have collected from somewhere, somehow, somewhat, and this is a decision we have made. And people will start to question him, like, where do you collect your data? How do you analyze your data? What kind of instrument are you using? People will start to question him on that. Right. Then people start to see like, well, look, there was a problem in page 5, which you didn't actually identify or address over here, which can cause some problem of your conclusion. And they tend to question, they'll start to question that, just as people start to question research reports nowadays. And
so maybe I'm just thinking, as you're saying now, as you're explaining how you can actually get people to start questioning, where data comes from and how it's presented and what instruments you use. perhaps the solution is to, and this might sound paradoxical as well,
Yep.
to position when you speak to people who might be hesitant to use analytics, position analytics as not numbers. The numbers are secondary. The most important part that we should focus on is what the numbers represent. And you don't have to understand statistics or math or anything like that to be able to justify what the analytics are based on. If you know the job, you will be able to tell me what are the things that are important that we should measure. If you know the job, you will know how would be the best way to measure stuff. If you know the job, you will know what insights, what knowledge, and this knowledge is, abstract, qualitative, back of the mind. What information can I use to make fair decisions? And nowhere in that conversation did anyone say anything about numbers or statistics. Yeah, that just came up. Was that profound or?
Yeah, I think we have an assumption over here. So my assumption is, your assumption is the guy was like a very decent individual. Like he doesn't have any motivation. He just wants to present the best information possible for his employees. And that's your assumption. And my assumption was the guy was very much motivated. So his power need to be held by other people in the organization. This is my assumption. So but I think you are right.
Use both assumptions. I think you make a very valid point.
Yeah, but I think you're right. If the fact that everybody is going to understand what analytics is doing is not going to be achievable in short period of time, and the best option should be stop resorting to analytic languages when you are communicating with your employees, because as long as they start to resorting to those languages, people will just give up.
Exactly. So when we're talking about analytics or presenting any information, anyone using analytics must be able to fully explain why am I using this thing, and not explain it by using standard deviations, means, medians, anything like reliability coefficients or anything like that. Explain to me the thing you're measuring, why you're measuring it, and why you are applying the knowledge that you're getting in this specific way. Don't want to know about numbers, okay? That's a technical part. Because I think we so often become slaves to the system.
Yeah, we do. We are. So as long as you start to mention like jargons or system words, people just give up. And they probably will question you, but they're to, because they don't want to sound stupid. And but the problem is that, as you said, it's very hard to do that. So you have been trying to do that, like teaching analytics without resorting to those words, and you know how hard it is. You know how hard it is, and I can't refrain myself from using any of those words, and I found it very difficult. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, do you think it's possible that, or do you think there should be some like knowledge, like at least any prerequisite knowledge people should possess before able to have a conversation between those people? Or do you think that it should be, should be solution be on the education side and try to get people on board with the idea and get them familiar with those terms, at least basic terms that we tend to talk about? Or do you think it should be like the analytics job to resort into more blank and less jargon languages to talk about these issues?
I think it's a bit of a tall order to think we're going to get anyone who's a decision maker, or let's say all managers on board with, let's call it analytic basics or something like that. Don't think that's realistic. I mean, it would be that would be ideal. I think what would probably be a good alternative or good second prize would be to get people to understand the concepts of reliability, validity, and fairness without using the actual words. Reliability, validity, and fairness. Because in that way, if you are the person using the analytics, you're able to defend what it's based on, why I'm using it in this way. If you are someone who is abusing it, it empowers other people to ask questions like, but why are you measuring that? No, don't tell me what the number is. I don't care how much it is. I want to know why you're measuring it. Why are you using it in this decision?
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's an option.
Probably you're right. And and also like speaking of like communication, there was an opposite kind of argument for analytic, which was very exactly opposite of what we have been discussing now, which was the reason why we should promote HR to use analytic, because everybody else is using analytic in the organization. Finance, marketing, like operation and supply chain, they are all using numbers to communicate with each other. So if we don't use analytic, if we don't talk about numbers, we won't be able to communicate with those people. And then there's this whole idea of strategic human resource management come into view, which was, if you can't frame a human issue in a number kind of way, then you can't actually link human issue with company performance.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid statement. It's gotten to a point now, and that's why a while ago I initiated that conversation with you about that analytics course. Is we're kind of we've reached a point in business now where HR really doesn't have a choice. They have to get on the analytics wagon, or
they have to. It's very much being driven by the whole strategic human resource management movement, which is you need to kind of, well, this is the model of the company, and they have variables of different kind of operations. And you, as a human resource manager, please put your staff in anywhere over here. So please put your staff in anywhere in this model, which need to be quantified, and tell me how you contribute to the final outcome variable we have, which is normally profit. So tell me, how do you actually contribute to the profit? So this kind of push the managers to kind of have to quantify the human investment in some sort of way, and to justify the existence of human resource management in a certain way. So even if you're trying to like convince the CEO to invest more money on well-being project, and you still need to say, we measure well-being and it's related to company performance in some weird kind of way, and so please, every single dollar you invest on well-being project, that'll be reflected in like how much dollar in the company profit. So it's a worthwhile thing to do. So, and before that, you need to kind of quantify the well-being in some way. So that's a prerequisite.
There's also a lot of black and white thinking. So people maybe think, because the human experience is so complex, and because I cannot measure everything,
exactly,
I shouldn't measure anything.
Exactly.
That was much more insightful than I thought it was going to be. I thought we were going to talk about measurement best practices and formulas and calculations.
Well, we can talk about that if you want, because I was like, because you say you want to be a little bit critical, and like, well, this is how we get critical.
I was thinking, because I couldn't think of a more qualitative way to discuss quantitative things, but I'm glad that it very organically, naturally happened. And I think we got some good insights, things to think about. And
because my position on that, like talk about quantitatively and qualitatively, my position was a little bit different from yours, because I don't think that will happen. Because I don't think that's possible.
What?
Like talking about quantitative stuff with using qualitative things, I don't think even possible. And I was like, people should start to learn those kind of quantitative things. People start to get used to equations and algorithms. This is my position. And I know I can be entirely wrong. And you don't necessarily have to agree. And I don't think you do.
I mean, I agree with you sorry, I have a dog losing its mind. Buddy. Someone just came home and he is like 80, but he's bounty like a little puppy.
Okay, maybe he's excited to see you.
Yeah, no, he gets very excited when someone comes home. Yeah, so yes, people should just know analytics, but let's be real, not.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think would be good. What would be good is like a middle ground.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Maybe empower people to think critically and around concepts like measuring the right thing in the right way, using it fairly. That's a little bit more digestible.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
If my 2 listeners that I have want to stalk you on the internet, where can they find you?
So I do have a personal website on the school website. I do have a personal page on the school website. So basically,
Right.
just Google my name and you'll find it.
Okay,
And
cool.
you
His
can
name
send
will
me emails.
Yeah. So his name will be in the description below, and it is University of Edinburgh
Yeah.
Business School.
Yeah, I'm still here. So, but not sure like in 2 or 3 years time, I'll see.
Well, it would be great if someone is watching this in 2 years' time still, and the content is still relevant. That would be great. Okay, cool. So go check out Yumeng on the University of Edinburgh Business School page. There, his contact details is over there. I am on all the socials at Clif with 1F P Lewis. Thank you for joining us, and please remember to tune in again next week, where I bully one of my other smart friends to be on my show.
Thank you. It's very nice to be here, and it's a
Bye.
pleasure. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.